one of the things I've seen, because I've spent a lot of time talking to young men, watching them, let's say, is that, and I'm wondering how you separate this out, because I would also say that there are elements of the social media world, the hyper-connected world, that are also particularly toxic to boys. And I don't know, and a lot of this, to me, seemed to emerge around the same period of time that you're describing. So I don't know what percentage of boys are now on ADHD medication, but it's always on the rise. And Jacques Panksepp, the affective neuroscientist who established the existence of the play circuit, pointed out that the primary effect of Ritalin is play suppression. That's what it does. Oh, absolutely. So there was this idea, Jonathan, initially that boys with fragmented attention had a paradoxical response to stimulants in that it increased their attentional focus. But that's not paradoxical at all. It does that to everyone. But what it does is it increases the probability that you'll focus on whatever you're focusing on. Now, what Panksepp showed very clearly, if you deprived young juvenile rats of rough and tumble play, their prefrontal cortexes didn't mature. And then if you let them play, they would play frenetically, like boys do after they've been forced to sit down forever in school, but that you could suppress that with Ritalin.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Panksepp's work on that it's brilliant. The play work plus the Ritalin work. It's just, well, especially because he also showed failure to mature at a prefrontal level. And that if you let the rats, the juveniles, play frenetically and exhaust themselves, say over some reasonable period of time, their prefrontal cortexes would develop. So it's catch-up behavior. So I saw hypothetically an increased war on male play and interest preferences that made itself manifest, I would say, with the hyperfeminization of the school system. And then as well, there was the communicated insistence that male ambition was toxic, that competitive games were bad, and that, to the degree that the patriarchy is a corrupt institution, that any sign of that demand for victory, let's say a competitive victory on the male front, was actually a sign of psychopathology. So I think part of the reason that the boys have been demoralized or are failing to participate is because they've been demoralized, and that's provided them also with an excuse to be irresponsible. Look, Nietzsche said, you're best punished for your virtues. So the conclusion is if you're going to be punished for being ambitious and goal-directed, then that's going to be very effective as a punishment, but it also gives you every reason to bow out and to be irresponsible. So I don't know what you think about that in combination with the things that you're seeing on the more specifically technological front.
Yeah. Well, so the boy's story is different from the girl's story, and it's a story of checking out of the real world. And I draw from this in part on Richard Reeves, whose wonderful book of Boys and Men. He points out that, boys and men used to dominate the economy and society in many ways. But beginning in the 70s, we get the transition away from physical work and longshoremen and strength and to a service economy. And we get, and girls are rising, which is great. But as girls are rising, boys are not rising too. In some ways, they're falling. And by 1980, I think it is, half of college students were female. Now it's 60% are female. So boys have been kind of checking out of school, checking out of the workplace. The electronic world, the online world's gotten better and better, more and more attractive for boys. They're spending more time on video games. So it is a story of male achievement, male motives being kind of hijacked or turned towards trivial, pointless pursuits that don't add up to anything. And so I would agree with you about the discouragement of male ego, ambition, desire to be great, the subversion of that into just wanting to do, higher up on a video game leaderboard, I suppose. But, I'd love to ask you, because I've been I've only really, I only really began turning to the boys' story about 3 or 4 years ago when I began working on the book. You've been talking to young men for a long time now. What do you see when you look at the malaise among young men? I mean, part of it is what you just said about, but just what's your diagnosis about what's happening to young men? Is it depression, anxiety? Is it hopelessness? What do you see happening?
Well, a huge part of it's fractured demoralization. Like one of the things I've really noticed, it's quite the stunning and horrifying thing to see. You know, I think the biggest impact what I've said on young men has been my drawing of a relationship between meaning, adventure, and responsibility. It's like, well, and you know, you touch on this in your book, like one of the things you point out. So let me take a bit of a sideways route here. When the big five theorists were laying out the semantic webs associated with negative emotion, neuroticism, McCrae, in particular with the Neo Big Five, noticed that self-consciousness and neuroticism were so tightly associated semantically that they were indistinguishable. So here's the rule. This is the rule. And you allude to this. If you think about yourself, you are going to be anxious and miserable. Those are the same thing. And you know that when you're possessed by a bout of self-consciousness. It's not pleasant. Okay, so then you might say, well, what do you do about that? And one answer would be, well, don't focus on yourself. But you can't not focus on yourself. You have to focus on something else. Okay, so what do you focus on if you're male? Well, you focus on responsible service to the future and others. Well, why? Well, because that gives you what you described as that slow dopamine kick. It's like that's where, and that's not happiness, it's meaning. Those are very different things. Happiness is that like hedonistic kick that can be hijacked by the AI machines. Meaning is less intense, but more sustaining. Okay, so where do you find that? And that's simple. You find that in the adoption of maximal responsibility.